There's another one you don't want to hear. Frankly, if you want.
1, 2, 3, set, go.
Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Power Chord Hour podcast. Hope you're doing well out there and thank you so much for checking out another one. As always, I am your host, Anthony Merchant, here with you for another episode and very excited for this one. I took last week off, as I'm sure you know, and if you did not check out, though, I did put a throwback episode up with Stephen Jenkins of Third Eye Blind. Talked to him 3 years ago, like my 6th interview I'd ever done. And we just talked for a few minutes about the 20th anniversary of their self-titled debut, the one with all those hits, with all the songs you know, all the songs you love, all off that record. I mean, that record's goddamn huge. Like one of the biggest selling records of the 90s, easily. And I got to talk to him. I was fortunate enough to do that and was nervous as hell. And I did enjoy it, but, and I didn't talk about it in the throwback episode, actually, just because it was such a short interview that, like, I talked about the interview longer than the actual interview was. So, I tried to shut the hell up about it and get on with it. But I think the other thing, too, as I was talking about, is I was kind of nervous about it, but it's like he was actually a very nice guy to talk to. But you can never get a great grasp on Stephen Jenkins because there are interviews where not that he's like super mean, but he can be indifferent. Like basically, if he's not interested, he'll show it. Like he's not someone who will fake interest, kind of. I'll put it that way because it's like I don't mean it like, oh, he seems like an asshole or anything like that. Like he just seems like if he's bored, he'll let you know that he's bored. So. I think when I went in, I mean, it was already one of my first interviews anyways, but I mean, someone of that high of profile and also knowing that from listening and hearing interviews from him throughout the years, because I'm definitely a big fan of his work, and I think he's just a crazy talented guy. But that was the thing. I'm like, because even I realized, I'm like, I had a day to write questions. Like I don't even think, actually I even have like a full 24 hours. I went into work, I was told like noon, like, hey, you want to interview him tomorrow at like 11 in the morning? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. And I'd kind of go home and try to think of stuff, but then I couldn't think of too much either because I only had like 5-6 minutes with him. But what I'm saying is, like I listen to it, I go like, oh, I definitely sound nervous, and I am. But the thing is part of it was also that because I kind of screwed myself, kind of having preconceived notions that like, oh, he might be difficult to interview. Where in actuality, he was actually very nice and was very kind of understanding for someone who was just kind of like a nervous kid interviewing someone who he like loves his music and I would definitely say look up to. I mean, I think extremely talented guy. I mean, I don't want to say that Third Eye Blind is underrated because that just sounds weird. I mean, like I already said, I mean, their self-titled record, like one of the biggest selling records of the 90s. You know what I mean? Like you still hear all those singles on the radio. Like it's never went away. Not at all. Like you still hear that stuff just as much as you did back in the day. But, I think as far as a band like albums go, I don't think they get enough credit, like kind of like non-singles and, basically anything after that record. I think they're another one of those bands, and, that might be a good topic for one of these podcasts is, bands who on like, maybe there's like that one record that they get credit for. And a lot of times it's like their first record, but like everything after that, is not like assessed fairly. And there's a lot of bands like that. And actually a few who we'll get into on this episode for a different reason. But I mean, there's just certain bands where I feel like Saves the Day is one where like first 3 or 4 records, I would even throw In Reverie in because, there was a time where, and I still think it's a polarizing record, but I think a lot of fans, the general consensus is that people like it, not their favorite Saves the Day record, but I think people like it enough. And I mean, I've always been a fan of it. I've always, because I like that. I like power pop. I like that like fuzzy guitar tone and stuff. Like they were doing things on there kind of remind me like Superdrag. And like, yes, I mean, it doesn't sound like a conventional Saves the Day record, but I mean, Stay What You Are really didn't either when it first came out, And I love both those records. But, Saves the Day is one of those where it's like kind of after In Reverie, I don't think they get a lot of credit for some of that stuff. And a band who I will talk about on this episode, the Get Up Kids, they're another one who really, I mean, for a lot of people after the first 2 records, don't give them enough credit. I do think on that last record, though, I think they did start that in the Kicker EP. I think they kind of started getting some people who were skeptical or just, just didn't really care about new music from them, and kind of got them to listen again, where like I think they were really, the last few records, they've kind of found this beautiful place where I think they're happy and content with what they're doing, but at the same time, like they can do new things and they don't feel like they're like just rehashing old music, but at the same time, they've kind of figured out how to add those elements that people love about them. So it's like, like Problems that by no means sounds like Something to Write Home About Part 2. Like I don't mean that at all, but it's like there are elements in there where you go, oh yeah, there's things in there that are like, that's the reason why I like Something to Write Home About so much. Like I think they've been very good at doing that, progressing as a band, but also being able to please fans and adding those elements without being, because, and I will get into them very soon here when we get into the topic of tonight's episode. But, the topic is actually slept on records. And what I mean by that, because I feel like that's a fairly general term, but when I say slept on records, I'm talking about those albums that, not that they're bad, because that is the one that I do want to make clear. Like any album that I'm talking about tonight, I love these records. They're great. Like they're some of them are my favorite records from the bands, but they're just slept on. They're things that I believe, some of these, it just depends. There's different reasons. The sound being so drastically different, just such a drastic change in sound being it. Also there's a lot of albums that I just truly think just under a different name would have sold like millions of copies. There's a lot of bands like that who I think put out albums where maybe doesn't sound straight up like them, but had you not put this under, whatever that band's name is and you market it differently, I think a lot of things could have been different. And I also think Preconceived Notions is another. I think some bands who, while they do have a good record, people were expecting something else, and didn't get it. I think other ones too are also just time in between. I mean, some bands just release such legendary records that like once they wait X amount of years to put something out, it's never going to meet expectations. Like when you have multiple decades in between records, it's going to be really, really hard to, like satisfy whatever expectations people have after decades of waiting. Like that's just what happens. You know what I mean? And I don't think that's anyone's fault. And look at, sometimes bands do come back with great reunion records decades later. And that's amazing. That's great to see. But there's also tons that we know that, put out a record years and years later that just shouldn't have, that just should have kind of kept their legacy the way it was and, just kind of leave it at that, I always think that's an interesting topic too. And I mean, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but another one with that where like, there's those certain bands who like you see who have been around since like the 60s or 70s and they're still touring to this day. And, they've never broken up. They're a band who probably are just really road dogs, who have really just probably have a few records that were really popular like decades ago, but like, you look and they haven't released anything in decades, like they've toured now for 30, 40 years just off a legacy. And I don't know, like part of me goes, you can laugh at that or go like, oh, they're just a legacy band or this or that. But it's like at the same time you go, but maybe they don't want to tarnish that legacy. You know what I mean? Like, and maybe their live show's still really good. Maybe they're still really into it, but even they realize that at a certain age and a certain time, they're not going to put something out that would be great. You know what I mean? Like some people just realize that it's like we had a time and place, and if we put a record out now, we can't write like that anymore. I've actually noticed the Vandals, a band that I love, but I've seen them say a couple times lately on social media that like people who ask for a new Vandals record, like, and they say is like they don't realize how terrible a Vandals record for a bunch of 50-year-olds would be. They're like, you don't want to hear a bunch of 50-year-olds try to play pop punk. They're like, it would not be good. And yes, they're joking in a way, but it's like a half joke, half, like, we're not going to fuck with our legacy. Like, and they are, they still, and they don't tour tons and tons, but they still tour and, they still do things occasionally. But they have this self-realization of like, I think they might have even said like covers are a different thing. Like maybe we would do covers, but it's like, you don't want to hear what a record would sound like if we wrote it right now. And, like that's the thing with those bands is you got to kind of respect that because some people do. I mean, there's some bands. I love Jawbreaker. They're one of my favorite bands. And I know that they have talked about writing music since reuniting. And like they have, nothing's been released, but they've talked about that they've written music together. And it's like, it's a hard one because there's a part of me that really wants to hear Jawbreaker. I mean, if you listen to the show, I think you know how much I love Jawbreaker, but I also have to be honest that, I mean, yes, I would listen to it, obviously. I mean, I would listen to it right away, but it's like, I would be very scared because after 20 something years, can they still write a Jawbreaker record, and not in a disparaging way. It's like, you're just different. Because sometimes people want to put you in that time capsule of you're still, Blake Schwarzenbach. I just butchered his name so badly. Blake Schwarzenbach. And, like they still expect you to be 27 years old. And it's like, he's not 27. He hasn't been 27 in 20 years probably. So it's like, it's nothing against him. It's just more of you've been in different bands, you've been in X amount of bands, at least 3 bands since Jawbreaker, your mind's probably in a different place. You're probably in a different place. There's a difference between going out and playing those old songs and then writing new stuff, And like I said, I'm really not against bands doing that because I mean, I think you do have the freedom to do that. Like you should have the freedom to do that. If you want to come back, I don't think a band should have to come back and only play the greatest hits. Like, if you're like, hey, we're bored of just playing these albums that we wrote 20-something years ago, totally you should write stuff. But, you do kind of side on that, on the side of caution because it's like, well, what's it going to be? But, yeah, like tonight I want to talk about Slept On Records and, some of these hurt bands' careers and, some of them, I would say just about all of them actually have become kind of cult favorites over the years, and they're just good examples of some albums just take time. There's certain albums that you listen to the first time, and it's just an instant thing. There's others that take forever to grow on you. Like Against Me is a band that I love so much. A lot of their records had to grow on me. Searching for Reform or Clarity, I remember listening to that for the first time, and I hated it. I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, I don't like this. Like, Don't Lose Touch was okay. I'm like, all right, this song's all right. And it's like, the rest of it's like, I don't get it. I don't like it. And then it took probably another 3 years of listening to it, and then I'm like, oh, like, this album's amazing. Like, this is a great record. I mean, their last few records have been like that for me. And even the Laura Jane Grace and the Devouring Mothers, like that one that she put out, like I did not like it all that much at first. I'm like, I'm not really into this. I was happy that she didn't put Under Against Me. And because that's an example of that kind of like, I want to talk about some of these records where it's like, releasing an album under a different name. And I think she might have even said at one point that it was supposed to be an Against Me record. And I'm happy she didn't release it as that because it is a great record. But this is an example of that where I think it was an artist who was smart enough to go, it's good, but it's not an Against Me record, and it's like, and it has nothing to do with the quality. It's like, this just sonically does not sound like it, and I respect her for that, where it's like, I'm not going to, because, you'll sell more records and get more attention if you put it under Against Me, obviously. But, I really respect that she went the other way. It's like, no, release it as this. And the first like 1 or 2 listens, I did not like it. I kind of forgot about the album for a while. It came out like at the end of 2018. I listened to like once, kind of forgot about it. And then like summer of 2019, I mean, we're talking like 7-8 months after it got released, I just kind of on a whim listened to it again, and it just hit me, and I'm like, holy shit, like this record's amazing. And I mean, I think that's some of her best stuff. Like, and I've kind of, it's funny because the past few weeks, I think I've started listening to it again and kind of getting back into that where like I'm incessantly listening to it. Like I did, like when I got into it, and listened to it like probably almost every day. And a great workout record, a great just driving around. Like it's good for all occasions. There's a song on there for all occasions, which I love. But, that's a good example of that. The very first, though, I think album that I want to talk about, on Slept On Records, and this one's kind of become, I think, a fan favorite to a point over the years, but I still think there's a lot of people who do not like this record. It's still polarizing. I think they've gotten more people over to the side of liking it than disliking it than maybe in the past. But the Get Up Kids with On a Wire, and really they're another one where I could probably say, all their records after Something to Write Home About are pretty slept on. But there are a couple that, I don't think are amazing. Mostly like Automatic, but like Problems is great. Guilt Show, very good record. I think that one slept on too, but I think that one gets a little more credit. And I can't remember the name of the single, but it's like track 2 on the record. That one did get, I think, like minor radio play. Like it did have some success with that one, I think, more than On a Wire. But you listen to On a Wire, and there's another one where it talks, like I was talking about with, sometimes it takes time to like really understand a record or digest it. And like, I heard this record, I think for the first time, maybe in 2013, 2014. So, I mean, I heard this 6 or 7 years ago for the first time because I got Something to Write Home About in 2010. That was my first Get Up Kids record. And that was 2010. And I remember I had never even heard that album. I'd never even heard the Get Up Kids. And that's maybe not true. I probably did hear 1 or 2 songs on a compilation. I just assumed that I had to have at some point. But I was 17. Yeah, I was 17. And because so many bands that I love just talked about how that record was their biggest influence. Like that, that band, but that record in like specifically, a bunch of bands saying like, oh yeah, we wouldn't be a band like without that record. And so I just kind of picked it up without ever hearing it. And then you hear Holiday, and I mean, obviously all the other songs, but like that's still one of my favorite album openers of all time. And it's just like, it's an amazing record, but it's like Holiday, one of the greatest album openers. And then On a Wire comes out after that. And, it's so, and Overdue is a great song, but like, think about it. That transition from Holiday to Overdue is pretty drastically different. And I mean, the rest of the album kind of has that, there's a couple quote unquote like emo ballads, I would say, on Something to Write Home About, but overall an energy on that record, that, I mean, really only 4 Minute Mile, I would say, had more energy than that. But I mean, Something to Write Home About still has a lot of that energy Something to Write Home About has a lot of the energy of 4 Minute Mile, I think, just more well produced. But, the energy on that, and it's a loud record, and it's not, the Get Up Kids, it's kind of tough. Like, I don't think they would ever want to be called pop punk. I think Matt Pryor would probably roll his eyes if you called the Get Up Kids pop punk. But I mean, for one, they've influenced the entire genre base. Any pop punk band that came out after like 1999, I mean, I think is at least somewhat influenced by the Get Up Kids, whether they like that or not. But, they're not pop punk, but I mean, there are those elements on there. Like, there just are. Like, I would say Holiday is a pop punk song. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's also kind of indie rock or whatever, but I would say pop punk is the best label for it if you have to label it. But like On a Wire, I think they really went the other way where like Something to Write Home About, not pop punk, but it's like, they're in that realm, but they're also in the realm of like indie rock and alternative, I mean, and it shows in who they could play with. They were a band who I think could go play with Alkaline Trio, but they could also go play with Superdrag or Superchunk. Like they could kind of do either. They were one of those, they were kind of versatile in that way, which I think is good and bad. Same with like Hot Rod Circuit, their label mates on Vagrant, where like Hot Rod Circuit, or another one where it's like, they're not a straight up pop punk band, but there are pop punk elements. But at the same time, that band is hugely influenced by like Arches of Loaf and once again Superchunk and Superdrag. I mean, they covered Superdrag, and I'm pretty sure they toured with them. Actually, hell, they did a split with them, actually, if I'm not mistaken. Or no, I'm sorry. I believe that's the Anniversary. Yeah, the Anniversary and Superdrag did a split. I don't think Hot Rod Circuit ever did, but they did cover Sucked Out in like 2010 on an EP, which actually I think is like the last thing they ever released. But, just one of those bands. I mean, same with like the Get Up Kids, were just kind of versatile in that way, where it's like, they'll play a Replacements cover, but they can also play, they would, and I don't think they actually ever played Warped Tour, if I'm not mistaken, but they could fit in on Warped Tour. You know what I mean? Like, that really wouldn't have been weird had they played there, or they like play Skate and Surf or something like that. And I mean, same with that, the fact that, I mean, like now they're on Polyvinyl Records, like, I mean, a pretty indie rock record label, and then, before that being on like a Vagrant, so I mean, they are very versatile in that way. And On a Wire, I think, shows them going more towards that indie rock side. I mean, you listen to that album and it's experimental, it's not fast. There's not really like, the energy is not there. It's not and not in a bad way entirely. Like I like On a Wire. I really do. I would not say it's my favorite Get Up Kids record, but it's also not my least favorite. It would still be like probably my fourth. I'd probably say like my fourth, but it's like, it's a good listen. It's a good record. When I'm in the mood for it, I'll listen to the whole thing. It's one of those where like, it's not my most listened to Get Up Kids record, but if I'm going to listen to it, I'm going to listen to it front to back. And like, I think Hannah Hold On, I think, is one of my favorite Get Up Kids album closers. I just think amazing. And I just think the album, they were more experimental, and I think they did show like, there's definitely a Beatles-esque like vibe on here where it's like, you can tell there's an influence, and they were kind of trying to write that way, I think, on certain songs. And that's like an influence you did not hear on the first two records, So I think when it came out, people were expecting, something more of the continuation of Something to Write Home About, and got something so left field, but in a way that I don't, didn't seem to help them. Obviously they put Guilt Show out a few years later and then broke up. But I think even at On a Wire, I don't know that they were in the best place. And, commercially afterwards, did not do well. Fans were not, a lot of people were not fans of it. They weren't a fan of that side of them. And, once again, it's just, when you go that far, sometimes it works. I would also assume that at some point when you do something like that, because I also think it was their reaction. Like, I do get that. They would probably say that too. Like, there are probably interviews where they say that, but it's like, it's definitely a reaction to, I think, the success of Something to Write Home About, where it's like, we're not going to write Holiday Part 2. We're not going to do, we're not going to sound like other bands that you're going to label as pop punk. We're going to go more towards this. We're going to show you influences that we have that, like we're not in this field with, because you also got to think of what was out at that time. So it's like, if people were calling them pop punk or throwing them in that realm, you have like Blink-182s and, Green Days and MXPX and NoFX and different bands like that, all bands I love, but, may not be the ones that Get Up Kids see themselves as. They may not want to be compared to Blink-182, So it's just one of those things where I think at the time, this was the result, this is the reaction. This is the reaction to being, getting some popularity off Something to Write Home About and kind of getting labeled something that they didn't want to be labeled, and be a part of something I don't think they want to be a part of, was write something like On a Wire, And doing that, in doing so, they didn't write a bad record, but they wrote a record that was going to take time, to really get into. And it could be years, you could really say years for people. And, and it was still kind of, like I was saying earlier, I only heard it a few years ago here, but it was kind of shocking. I think at some point I probably heard other people had told me like, hey, it doesn't sound like Something to Write Home About or 4 Minute Mile. But, you do listen to it, and there's still kind of a shock of like, oh, like this is different. Like when you look at the timeline too, it's like, this is kind of weird. By the time they got to Automatic, when they got back together, like, and that one's pretty left field, but I will say that one's not as, I think under a different name, I think it would have done better. It's an example of that, but I don't know that I would have loved that record even under a different name. Like it was good indie rock, but it wasn't anything amazing. I think even if it was under a different name, like it would be something that I would like hear in a record store, like being played, and I may not hate it. It may not be the worst music to listen to while I'm walking around, but I'm probably not going to go home, and listen to that in my free time or anything like that, and they've definitely gotten, way better since then. But like, they kind of experimented on that. And I think if On a Wire was something that came out maybe after like Automatic, people may look at it differently. You know what I mean? Like, and they may even like it more. But coming off after your biggest record and, doing something so left field, it just didn't work for them, and like Saves the Day kind of did that, but it did work for them, not within Reverie, but with Stay What You Are. There are definitely people who heard it who maybe didn't like it because it is fairly left field from Through Being Cool, but it's not it's not as left field, though, I will say, as On a Wire, but still different. It's a lot cleaner sounding, but there's still fast songs on there. There's still, I didn't think they lost that energy entirely. I think more than anything, they just added, for one, better production, and two, they just add different influences. Like I don't think it was totally different than, like Campfire Kansas, now a classic, Get Up Kid song and a great song, but not something you'd probably hear on the first two records, where there are some songs like Firefly, and maybe it would have been a little, it's already fast on there, but it probably would have been even more faster tempo, but I could have heard that song on Through Being Cool, I think. Whereas with the Get Up Kids, there's nothing with On a Wire that I would have heard, I think, on the previous record. With Saves the Day, it did end up working. That's still, I mean, that record went gold, and I mean, would say is probably their best-selling record. Like, the fan favorite, that is sometimes a fan favorite, but I feel like Through Being Cool is the overall fan favorite, but commercially, there's probably more people who would know, like, At Your Funeral or even, like, Freakish, which, is a shame that Freakish is, I mean, it's a shame either of those songs don't get more, you don't really hear them, like, on rock radio or anything now, but you'll hear them, like, on XM and stuff, and, like, I guess maybe on like an alternative station, maybe would play it. I would hope, I mean, I know I play it on the radio show, but like Freakish for being a single, it's like, what a great song that definitely should get more play. Like, I would love to hear that on like, just more places. I mean, that there's songs on that record that just deserve so much, recognition. That album is so great. I love Stay What You Are. But, I think overall that worked better for Saves the Day. Whereas with the Get Up Kids, kind of did the same thing with On a Wire, and just kind of making a record, which I think now there's people who have come around to it, and then there's also people who never have listened to it again, who just, there's a bad taste in their mouth and they never went back to it. And it's not to say they may listen to it and they may not like it. They may not like it anymore now. Maybe their opinion doesn't change. But I think it's an album that's worth going back and checking out. If it's been years since you've heard it and you're not really a fan of it, I'd say it's worth going and checking out. If your tastes have changed throughout the years, you may find that you really like it. I mean, if your tastes haven't changed, then, you maybe not. You may still fucking hate it, but I would still say it's worth going back and listening to. Because I still think it's slept on. It definitely gets more recognition, but definitely I think still. I will say this. I've seen them live a few times, and when they play the On a Wire songs, I think they get the least reaction. I will say they not get a great one. To be fair, a few of those songs though I don't think are great live. Like that, and that's the thing with them. It's like, as much as I think they want to play, which the last few, like including with Problems, like there's songs on there I want to hear live so bad. Sadly, I missed them when they were touring off of it. But like there's songs off there that would sound great live. But the thing with On a Wire, it's like I like those songs, but a lot of them just don't. They're just boring live. They're just slow tempo. They're just not, including when you're playing those fast old songs, like you're playing Woodson or something, it's like, it's hard to go into some of those songs. It just kind of takes the energy out of the show. So, I mean, I think they end up playing a lot more of like the older stuff, but it's not, I mean, the older stuff's great too, but it's like, I don't even think it's you guys weren't good after, this record. It's more of in a live setting, you want that. It's the same as Saves the Day. Like I love later Saves the Day records as well, but let's be honest. You want to hear the fast, fun shit live. You don't want to hear the 10-minute like song off Daybreak. Like that's not what you want to hear live. I mean, at least not me. I'm not really into that as much. It's like I want to hear the fast-paced songs, the things you can like, start a circle pit to, like because that's just fun. You know what I mean? Like that's what translates best live. And I mean, then those are the best bands. It's like there's so many bands out there that are just boring. If their music's kind of the slower tempo, and it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe it's good musicianship, but it's like a lot of it's just boring. Like I like it fast and sloppy live. Like it, it definitely goes back to that whole energy. It's the vibe of it, it's the energy of it. And On a Wire, great record. Live, there's much better Get Up Kid songs that I want to hear live. Than most of the stuff on there. I would like to hear. I can't remember now. Maybe I have heard Hannah Hold On live because I really do. I think that's that's up there as one of my favorite Get Up Kid songs. Like On a Wire, good record. Not my favorite Get Up Kids record, but there are a couple songs on there. And Overdue is also a great album opener. Once again, different, but I also get it. They had different influences. They had different things that they wanted to incorporate, and they didn't want to be pigeonholed to a sound. I definitely think this is an album that's a reaction to the success of the one before. Bands do that. I mean, Green Day, me and Kyle talking about Insomniac a few weeks back. I mean, that album was a reaction to the success of Dookie. I mean, it really was, and it in a direct way, because not all albums are. I mean, yes, you obviously have a follow up to your successful album. But a lot of times people just go to the next kind of natural progression, or they play it safe and kind of keep it to like that. There's other times where bands, their reactions are kind of that, where it's like, we don't like the success, we don't, because it's not really so much of we're afraid of it. There's bands who obviously are like the pressure of it and wanting to have that a second big album, but other ones are kind of like, nah, fuck it, like we don't want to be, we're not that, like we're this. Sometimes it works for them, other times it doesn't, And I mean, on a wire. Probably, I mean, and that's the thing is like even though people have come over or come around to it, I still don't think it was the best thing for their career at all. I mean, the best, I mean, it wasn't really, let's be honest. I mean, had they written Something to Write Home About Part 2, it probably would have been, because then they would have went and they would have played with, because that's the other thing too, is you listen like On a Wire and it's like, I do know, actually, I was going to say I didn't know who they toured with around that time, but I do know Superchunk, that Superchunk opening for them, which was amazing. I would love to have seen that. But I mean, like, if you think of certain bands who they could have toured with off the first 2 records, and then you think of them playing with those bands on a Wire, probably a lot of people not into it. Like if they were there for fast punk stuff and, more of the pop punk stuff and that side of the band, yeah. They're like, what is this? Like, once again, it just does not translate as well live. But great record and very much slept on record, very much slept on record. But going on to the next one here that I have, and I mean, these are really just, I mean, there's so many, but these were just kind of the ones that I had that I'm like, these ones generally I don't think get the attention that they deserve, even after all these years. And my next one would definitely be the Suicide Machines with their self-titled record. And I mean, this one was a shock to me the first time I heard it. I was not prepared, and not in a bad way. I actually loved this record from the first time I heard it, but just how different it was. I mean, in just a way where I'm like, I had heard the first 2 records, and then I heard this. And then, I mean, they're also like the Get Up Kids, where I was very late to the game. Like, I first started listening to the Suicide Machines in 2012 or 2013 and, heard the first 2 records. Then I went to listen to this one. And, I mean, once again, great record. But, I mean, Sometimes I Don't Mind comes on and just how different. You know what I mean? Like, how totally different from the ska punk band on those first 2 albums. I mean, totally left field. I mean, probably even more than On a Wire. Like, On a Wire, very left field, but I mean, it's still, like there's still some elements where like with this one, just totally different. I mean, they kept fast tempos, but there's a lot more mid-tempo songs on this album. Whereas, with the first 2 albums, it's like they just come in really fast. Songs are just blazing fast. This one, they slow them down a little. They're a little longer. There's a little more like structure to them. There's like different stuff. You definitely hear different like instruments in there. I mean, definitely more produced. And the thing with them too is like the Suicide Machines, as much as they were like a raw punk band and like ska punk band, like the production was always good on their stuff. Like obviously the budget for being on Hollywood Records, but like even on the first 2 albums where it's like there's not a lot of added production per se, it is still produced well and it still sounds really like it's a good recording. Like everything sounds really good on that album. But on the 3rd one, I think it really exceptionally sounds good. I don't know who produced it off the top of my head, but like I thought they did a really good job at it. And like Sometimes I Don't Mind is one of those ones where and it was like a minor radio hit, but like that one I would love to hear more. Just one of those ones where minor radio hit in its day that you don't hear anymore, like at all. Like I've never heard that song unless I'm playing on my show. I've never heard that song on the radio. And I just think it deserves to be on there. Like, what a great pop song. But, like, that's the thing. It's like you don't really hear people saying what a great pop song when you're referencing the Suicide Machines. But you do on this album, And, like, this is one of those ones where it is slept on, I think, still. But I can understand it in that way where I go, it's so totally different from the rest of their catalog that if you're not a fan of it, I don't blame you. Like, sometimes I think people are hard-headed where I'm just like, you're like really like you're just being stubborn. Like if you actually gave this a chance, you would like it. But it's like there's people where it's like, look at, if you love like ska, like that's what you love about the Suicide Machines or the punk side of them, just that really aggressive, like just because they are a punk, like they're not even really a pop punk band. They're a punk band. Like that side of them, like they're a ska punk band, but they don't have like the pop punk of like Less Than Jake and stuff. Like they got more of that edge to them for sure. I mean, they're kind of in a lot of ways they're kind of like Kid Dynamite, but with ska, like a ska influence. But, I mean, and also the other interesting thing about them, I always think too, is like how they're a ska band without a horn section. Obviously there's a few songs with horns on it, but like they're a ska band that just never have a horn section, which, but then again, you know what I mean? One of the greatest ska bands of all time, Operation Ivy, I guess they didn't have a horn section either. So, I guess you do learn from the greats. But yeah, like pop music is not what or like a pop song is not really what you would talk about when you're talking about a Suicide Machines record or a song. And Sometimes I Don't Mind is a really good one. So is Permanent Holiday. Another one which I think may have been released as a single. Once again, doesn't mean it was like popular, but was released as a single. And another one where it's like it's just a really catchy song and it's really good. It's not something that you talk about with it. And, yes, it's good. Like the Suicide Machines always write great records. But yeah, you would not talk about the songs the same way that you do on there. But they're just really good and well written. And I couldn't find it anymore. I don't know if he deleted it, but Jason Navarro did this really cool thing for a while on his Instagram where he was like talking about all the Suicide Machines, actually all his releases. He's talking about Hellmouth, Break Anchor, like everything Suicide Machines did, compilations they were on, like really, really cool. He did this like a year or two ago, and I went to go look for it before this episode, and he looks like he deleted a bunch of stuff off his Instagram, so I just couldn't find it. But I remember him saying that he really wasn't writing songs at the time for it. It was the guitarist and bass player, I believe, at the time. And is it Royce? I cannot remember their names off the top of their heads. But the original like kind of lineup. I mean, Derek Grant was out of the band at that point. He left after Battle Hymns. But besides that, same lineup from the first two records. But I mean, he basically said that, I mean, he was kind of I think he was kind of getting disinterested in the band kind of at that point, and they were writing the songs. I think he also said they were just smoking too much weed and listening to too much Beatles. He's like, and I don't know that Jason has the, I don't think he loves that record. Like like On a Wire, I feel like the Get Up Kids would say they still stand by it. Like I feel like all of them still like that record. Like they're not ones who would be like, we don't like it or we regret making it. I just don't see them saying that. Whereas Jason's not a fan, I don't think, of the self-titled record. I think he realizes it's very, very different. And I mean, that's the other thing, is kind of another reaction to that. Their records after that, they shifted back and actually went even more fast and kind of hardcore than they did on the first two records. But I think that's what he wanted. I don't even think it was so much to appease fans, because you could be like, oh, well, it didn't do this didn't work for them, so they went back to this. But they really didn't. Like that's what he wanted to do, and that they started doing that, like on the Side One Dummy records, and obviously like Revolution Spring this year, which is still one of my favorite records of the year. It's still in my top 3 records. I love that thing, and that's a good example of a band who not releasing anything for almost 2 decades, coming back so strong with one of their best records. Like honestly, one of their best records. Actually, funny enough, their self-titled record used to be my 3rd favorite. Basically, the first 2 Suicide Machines records, and you can kind of flip them back and forth. I really like them both equally the same, I would say. And then the 3rd favorite was their self-titled. Revolution Spring takes that now. It is knocked self-titled out of there. But I still really have a soft spot for self-titled. Like totally different. I get it. It's totally different. But this is one where. And I don't know if putting it under a name, I don't think this is an example of that, because Suicide Machines got attention with the first 2 records, but I don't know if they were ever big enough where, like, the general public had preconceived notions of them. Like, I guess maybe the name is a bit, you know what I mean? Like, I guess if you played it for some, like me, I don't know. I guess not really, because they're, including at that time, in the year like 2000, there's other bands with more ridiculous names on the radio and stuff. So, I mean, I don't know that Suicide Machines was what deterred people. Because, I mean, they did still sell a lot of records. Like, I mean, they did actually, I don't know that they ever went gold, but, like, they did sell a lot of albums. Like, I think more albums than people realize. Like, even I sometimes don't realize how big the Suicide Machines are. I mean, funny enough, I remember seeing them in 2015 and buying a shirt. at their show. And I just remember like every time I wore it around, actually I still have it. And anytime I wear it, I would say almost every time I get one person who compliments it. And I mean, unless they're just fucking weirdos who see someone wearing a shirt that says Suicide Machines and they're just like, that's cool. I mean, I assume they know that, they're the band. And I'm just it always surprises me. Not that I thought like they were an unknown band or anything like that, but like I think I've gotten more compliments on my Suicide Machine shirt than any other shirt I've ever worn. Like I think more people have like rad shirt, to that. And very, very cool, I would say. I mean, they're one of my favorite ska bands. But on this one, obviously no ska. And funny enough, I mean, one of the few times you'll probably hear someone comparing the Suicide Machines to the Get Up Kids. But this album having that Beatles influence, another one where bringing out your Beatles influence kind of, fucked up your career. Definitely another one where, I mean, there's tons of bands who obviously rip off the Beatles or influenced by them, but there's certain genres, I think, where if you start to sound like them, it's a no-no. And I would say anything in like the punk realm would be that. There's and I gotta say, I mean, I don't even remember the last time I listened to them now. I mean, they've not released anything good, and I don't know how long, but I remember being a really big Panic at the Disco fan when I was younger and loving the first, and actually I still stand by the first record, and Pretty Odd coming out afterwards, and just, I mean, it's sounding like a straight up Beatles ripoff, not liking it at the time, where now in retrospect I go back, and I haven't listened to it in years, but anytime I put it on, I'll periodically put it on. I'll go years without listening to it, and then I'll like put it on once or twice. Kind of like with their first record, I'll go years and then just kind of randomly listen to it. It's like, all right, I still like this. Like, it's still pretty good. And, now I listen to it and I actually like it quite a bit, where I'm like, that Beatles influence is cool. But at the time, I'm like, that's another one where it's like, you had like no Beatles influence on your first record. And then the next one, you're just like fucking ripping them off. It's like, I don't know about this. I'll do an episode of that, just bands who ripped off the Beatles randomly on an album. Like no sign of them before that record, but all of a sudden they just go all in with the Beatles on one record. And, it's funny though, Suicide Machines, because of all the bands though, to kind of take a Beatlesy direction, like, they're quite an interesting one. But, again, I like this record. I don't think you're ever going to hear them play this stuff live. I really don't think they play anything. I don't even think they play like Sometimes I Don't Mind. Like, I don't think they play anything off this record live. It's not something that, I think the general consensus in the band, and obviously the only one left from that era is Jason Navarro, but I know he's not a big fan. I don't know what the other dudes think, but I know he's not a big fan. Obviously doesn't play this stuff. And I think there's, though, that's another one where I got to say, like, it's a record that I really like, and I would actually be stoked to hear some of those songs live, but I also get it because they're just such a fast-paced, like, band. Like, if you go see them live, I mean, it's movement the entire time. Like, that's what they do. Like, that's what they do best. I saw them open for the Descendants a few years ago, and it's like, my God, like, just so much energy. Like, Jason is such a great frontman too. Like, he's just insane, jumping in the crowd, like going crazy. Like, they're a band who plays, 15 songs in 30 minutes, kind of like the Ramones. And I do think that, as much as I love this record, most of these songs, if they pulled out live, would just kind of fuck up the flow of it. You know what I mean? Like, just to be honest, like, the flow of the set would probably get messed up throwing those songs in. Like, I would love to hear Sometimes I Don't Mind, but I don't know where you put that in the set, You definitely don't open with it. You definitely don't close with it. And, like, I don't know. I think anywhere you put it, like, I just don't know where that would work, So it's like, part of me would like to hear those songs, but I'm also like, hey, I get it. Like, I'm not mad. I'm not really mad that they don't play the songs. But next one, which kind of goes with Suicide Machines, because the singer of this next band is the reason that I started listening to Suicide Machines, because he told me to go listen to them. But Hawthorne Heights, and my boy JT Woodruff, shout out to him, telling me to go listen to that. He told me to start with the first two records. Then he told me to listen to the third record, and he was kind of the same way. I mean, I remember telling him, like, after I listened to it, like, I'm like right away, like, holy shit, dude, like, that was different. And I want to say he's a fan of it. I don't think he hates it. I think he likes that record too, but he's just like, yeah, like, that's different, right? And I mean, also, how funny, I mean, with Sometimes I Don't Mind, if you don't know that record, also, like, for the Suicide Machines, it's a song about a dog. It's kind of funny. Like, the opening song is about a dog, and it's like, and it sounds very 90s too, but in a different way, because really the Suicide Machines, even though obviously, kind of get associated with the 90s, that's when they started, I don't feel like they sound, like, besides the fact that ska was big in the 90s, they don't sound super definitive, I think, of an era. Like, and part of it, I think, is not having those horn section, where, like, I feel like it makes it a little more timeless and less of a like, third wave ska kind of sounding band. But on that song, I do think, like, the guitar effects and stuff make me think of, like, the mid to late 90s. It really does. Like, in mid to late 90s, like, radio, and kind of like, not soft rock, but even kind of Cranberries-y kind of stuff. Like, not bad, just different for the Suicide Machines, not what you would expect. But but I also got to say, how great songwriting, though. You have a song like that, so catchy. And then I remember the first time listening and then realizing it's about a dog at the end. And it's like, it is clever, but it's like, it is also kind of interesting, be like the album opener and stuff. But anyway, getting back to Hawthorne Heights, and JT turning me on to them, dudes always turn me on to good shit. But Fragile Future, their third album, their first one after their unclean vocalist and guitar player Casey Calvert passed away. And just such a sad, unexpected death, including, it's like, those dudes are not partiers. You know what I mean? Like, it was one of those things too, where, like, I think some people looked at it like, oh, he did, like, I think accidentally overdosed on, like, some kind of, like, prescription medicine. But, like, people kind of looked at it because, he was a young dude, and it's like, oh, they must be partying stuff. It's like, half that band is straight edge. Like, half those dudes don't party at all. Like, they're just, clean dudes, really, really good guys. And just so sad and unexpected. You know what I mean? Because it is. It's like, it's one of those things where it's like, there's certain guys where it's like, yeah, they were partying all the time, and it's like, maybe you didn't see them, joining the 27 Club or whatever, but it's like, you weren't super surprised, But I think this album, for one, their first two records just being so big, and them being such a, popular band, I think at the time, I'm pretty sure the best-selling Victory Records band. I don't know if they still are. They might still even be. Even if they're not, they still have to be one of the best-selling bands ever on Victory Records. But a lot riding on their third record. Even before the death of Casey. Obviously, having that next follow-up, everyone was kind of waiting for it, and then that happening. The pressure for one, and also credit to them for even, like, moving on and putting out a new record. But I think it was extremely hard. And what I appreciate too, because, like, I'm sure it's hard to sing about, but they there's a lot of songs on there that are very brutally honest lyrically. Like, just talking, obviously are dealing and talking about Casey and like his death and everything. And they're put in a position where, like, their sound is kind of forced to change. They didn't want to add another member after that. And, they had three guitarists. So, at that point, they still had two guitarists, but, Casey screamed on those, obviously a big element of the band, and a big part of their sound. And, once that was gone, and this is why I think it slept on. I think they did a good job at doing elements where, like, they would, obviously you couldn't, it's not the same thing as, like, someone screaming and having unclean vocals, but they added different elements to the, I think, songs where it made it heavier, in ways where it's like, all right, well, it's like we're not doing heavy things so much vocally, but it's like musically we are. And I think they did really well at that, This is another one where I think within more recent years, I see people coming around to it and liking it more. But, it's not an album that's left field per se. Like, they didn't really change their sound that drastically, including when you compare them to, like, the Suicide Machines or the Get Up Kids with, like the last two examples there. I don't think it changed that much. The biggest thing was obviously no more unclean vocals, but it's like they were still, pretty heavy and guitar driven and everything. There's still breakdowns and stuff. But I think at the same time, I think what you did see, which is what I think you would see with a lot of bands who, including of that era, where if you took out those unclean vocals, kind of were more of a pop punk band, or pop rock band even, who, just now don't have the screaming. And, like, I think on Fragile Future, you kind of do that where it's like they didn't change it that much. When you take that out, instead of, I don't want to call them screamo, but it's like you now kind of take it from that element, bands like that you would put in there, like Silversteins and, and Aidens and different things like that. And now you're kind of more, if you take that out, now it's like, now you sound more kind of like a pop or like pop rock band, But I think they sound great that way. Like this record and the next one, Skeletons, which I think is another one that is pretty slept on. But once again, I think I do see people coming around to it more now, though. Like I've seen in the past few years, I noticed they play the songs more live. Like they have went back and it's like now they're playing stuff off, which I love to see because I love those records. For a long time, they did play more of like greatest hit sets and would play stuff more off like the first two records and stuff. And now I see them play more shit off like Fragile Future and Skeletons. Because I think a lot more people they've also went and listened to them. I mean, the other thing here, which I want to get to on why I think this one was slept on, was it also just wasn't given the same amount of marketing. Like Victory Records, yes, I mean, they've fucked over almost every band that's ever worked with them. Most people don't have a lot of good things to say about Victory Records. Like, that's just the truth. But one thing that I think every band on that label will tell you, anyone who's ever paid attention to them will tell you, they know how to market music. They really do. They know how to sell records. They know how to get the word out there. They're really, really good at that. You cannot take that away from them. You may not be a fan of the music and the genre, that the stuff that they release. You may not be a fan of them because, once again, we're not greatest to their bands. But what you have to give them credit for, they knew how to market things. Whole reason why I know, why I knew all those Victory bands back in the day, why I knew Hawthorne Heights, Take Back Sunday, and Bayside, and Silverstein, and Aiden, and The Audition, and and Student Rick way earlier, and just all those different Snapcase, all the different bands. And it's because they know how to market. They absolutely knew how to market. In a lot of ways too. Back in the day, where things have changed now, but we're very good with the compilations, and I mean getting stuff, including like on Fuse, and just really getting the word out there on things. Having the sampler discs in all their albums, so you go buy one Victory album, and then you get a sampler of all these other Victory bands. Like, they knew what they were doing, and they were very good, I think, at promoting the first two Hawthorne Heights records. And then they got in that lawsuit with Hawthorne Heights, and they still put out Fragile Future, and I think it was kind of weird because I think Hawthorne Heights was kind of trying to get out of their record deal with Victory, because Victory was like withholding royalties and just doing the shady shit that Victory Records does. A lot of different things where if you look, you go, yeah, I can't blame them for not wanting to be on that label. They did not win the lawsuit, and I think it cost the band a lot of money financially, and they were still on the label. And, obviously the label still put it out and whatnot, but I don't think it did not get the same kind of promotion and advertisement that it probably should have gotten. It should have been marketed more. It should have been pushed more. There's songs on there that should have been huge. Like, I think, once again, going back to that, where it's like taking out those unclean vocals, they're more like a pop punk band. And I think like Rescue Me is a great pop punk song. Like, that's a good song for, radio. Like, that's a catchy song. Somewhere in Between, that's another one that I think would have worked really well, and they got kind of pushed. They had music videos. I've heard those songs on the radio. Hell, I remember the Top 40 radio station I used to work at. We did have Rescue Me, actually. That was in there, so it's like, back in long before I was there, they obviously put that in rotation, and I would always try to sneak it in there when I did the music directing part, and it's schedule music. I would always throw it on in there, but it got some attention, but was not pushed like it should have. And I definitely think that probably has to do with the fact that, Victory probably wasn't super happy with the lawsuit. And, I don't know, sound-wise, I don't know if Victory if they were happy that they didn't add a new screamer and third guitarist. Like, Victory may have wanted them to be heavier. I don't know. But, I think it definitely could have been promoted better. And the other thing, too, is there's people who wanted Hawthorne Heights to sound like the first, be a heavier band and have the screaming. So when that's not on there, they're not into it. Where there's people who maybe weren't into the first, the unclean vocals and the band kind of on that heavier side, where they actually probably really would have liked Fragile Future, and same with Skeletons, probably would have liked those records. Like if they're fans of like pop punk or pop rock and just weren't really fans of like, the heavier stuff of Silence and Black and White, If Only You're Lonely, like I think they actually really would have liked this. But it goes back to, marketing in a different way. I mean, this is anyone's fault, but basically, Hawthorne Heights had quite a bit of popularity at that point. But that means that certain people wanted them to sound a certain way, and there's other people who thought they sounded a certain way and just expected that. Just went, oh, well, Hawthorne Heights sounds like this, where in actuality it's like, no, like listen to Rescue Me. Like it's, it's more of this instead of that, and it works really, really well. Like, that band can write really catchy songs. They're very, very good at that. And I think they've been good too. Like they're another one where I think they've kind of found a good place where like, and obviously they have added Mark McMillan, who we've had on the show, former guest of the show, very, very good dude. Just all those guys in that band, I can't say good enough stuff about. Like seriously, like if there is a band who you should model, like if you're in a band, you should be like Hawthorne Heights. Like the way they treat their fans, the way they run their shit, like just how DIY they are. For a band who's had as much success as they've had, there's few bands who I know who are as DIY as them. Like really are really good at that, are very creative people. I can't say enough good shit about them. I mean, I don't think you really find people out there who can say anything bad about them. Whether or not you like their music, like you just can't say anything bad about them. They're all good fucking people. Like everyone in that camp is just good people. And I think they're all very, very good dudes. But yeah, Mark does do unclean vocals. So, I mean, they have brought that back. They have brought that element back. But, I think they've also kind of continued on where it's like there are songs, not even full albums, but it's like they even do that with songs where it's like we don't need to have screaming in every song. Sometimes they do have stuff that does kind of go back more to that like Fragile Future sound, where it's like, it is more of this instead of, the kind of, because I don't like the term screamo. I mean, obviously emo is the other one, right? I hate that term as well, which I also give them credit though. I think they've leaned into that more because, people kind of used to give them shit for that. And I think now they lean into it in a way where it's like, it's funny. I think they've handled it quite well, including the fact that they just sell a shirt that just says emo on it and have sold shit tons of those shirts. And I think if anyone deserves to make money off a shirt that says emo, I think it's Hawthorne Heights. I think that is well-deserved money. But yeah, I think they're a band who I think after those records kind of found a nice in-between too, where like, kind of sound like Fragile Future and Skeletons, but kind of also added back that kind of harder edge of the first two records, And once again, not super left field. I don't think that Fragile Future was super left field. I just don't think it's what people were expecting. It's not what they wanted at the time. They did kind of want, Ohio is for Lovers Part 2. I think they did kind of want things like that. And, you weren't getting that, Casey was no longer in the band, that changed things up. And, but once again, they didn't put something bad out. I mean, the record sounds great. The production's really good. I love the album artwork. Album artwork for it is great. And yeah, I mean, I think this is one I think a lot of fans have come around to it. And I also think there are people who will tell you aren't huge Hawthorne Heights fans, but have, like I was saying, like have heard that album and are like, oh no, like I like that. Like I do like that album. Like maybe they're not super into the band, but that one they can get into, Next up, another one, and I won't go too far on this, but I mean Green Day, obviously me and Kyle talked about Insomniac a lot and how underrated that one is, but I feel like people have come around to that. That one is a big fan favorite. Warning, though, is a very slept-on record, I would say. It's probably their most slept-on record. Like, Nimrod, Insomniac, Warning, all very, very underrated, don't get enough attention. But Warning, even now, like, I think is still probably their like, far from their best-selling record, like, has just not sold much at all. And just very... it's another one. They kind of did different shit. Nimrod, they kind of played around and had a couple, they would do different genres and kind of play around with songs more. It wasn't just a straight up punk record. But Warning, they went even further that way. I mean, there's songs on there that just aren't really punk at all. You wouldn't even label them that. And they're great songs. They're different. And they're still. But Green Day. The other thing I like about it though is it is still Green Day. Like the chord progressions in it, the lyrics, like all that stuff. Like I still feel like it's a Green Day record. Like it still very much sounds like an album that was written by Billy, Mike and Trey. Like 100%. It doesn't sound so different in that way, but they definitely kind of went like they did with Nimrod, where they were playing around with different things. And on this one, they really went that way. I also think it's like their most Replacements influenced album. I think the whole band, I mean, hugely influenced by the Replacements, and throughout their entire career. But I think if there's a record where they specifically sound most like them and definitely sound like they were listening to them, I think it was on Warning. I think Church on Sunday sounds like it could have been written by Paul Westerberg. And including like Paul Westerberg's solo career, like I could hear that as a Paul solo song. Like I would love to hear him cover that, like totally. Like the lyrics, kind of the cleverness of it, like just everything about it, I really, really like. And I definitely, because I'm such a big Replacements fan that I'm like, fuck yeah, like I like that it's kind of on the nose there, where it's like you can definitely hear that influence in there more than ever. And I think they're also, they were all around age 30 at that point. This was them, obviously not old, but like, they were getting older. Like Dookie at that point had been out for, which is still funny to think, I guess, only maybe six years, I believe. Yeah, 94. And Warning came out in 2000. I guess not as long as I thought, actually, but still, that album was 6 years old. It wasn't that, they were older now, and kind of a more mature sound on this one. I think it's also just that of like getting older, having different influences, and also not wanting to keep, we don't want to just play, 3-chord punk. But once again, what I like is they didn't play 3-chord punk, but they kind of kept the 3-chord simplicity. Like it's very much a Green Day record, but in a different way, and they do that well. I mean, even on like their last record, like I didn't love it, Father of All Motherfuckers, but I did really just recently kind of start listening to the whole thing, and I don't love it, but there are songs on it that I like enough, and I'm like, it is good because it's like it's still Green Day, but it's Green Day kind of doing more of just like straight up rock and roll. And they've done that throughout their careers, where it's like this song's kind of green, it's kind of folksy, but it's like it's Green Day, or it's an acoustic ballad, but Green Day. And I think they do that well, where sometimes they'll do different shit, but it's still in that vein where it's not this super left field, like what the fuck are they doing? It's like, oh no, like I like this, like it's different. But it's like I like it, Same a lot of their side projects like Foxborough Hot Tubs or the Network. Allegedly, I know. Obviously, they're not the Network, but if they were the Network, which I know they're working on some stuff now, which is pretty cool. I'm excited for that. And it's funny because I had not listened to Network in a while, in years. And then I saw they were talking about releasing new stuff, and then I like thought about them, and I'm like, oh yeah, like that's really good stuff. I really like that record. If you never listened to it, go check out the Network. They only have one album, I believe. There's only one album out, but really, really good stuff. It's not Green Day though. Allegedly, it's not. It's definitely not Green Day in that band. It is not them in masks. 100%. But yeah, Warning is not your traditional Green Day record, but I don't think that makes it bad. But still very much slept on. I don't know. I don't think I've heard the band say that they hate it, but I don't think they think it's their best work ever. And like live, like I mean, you hear like Warning, you might hear Minority live, but that's about it. They don't play a whole lot. And it's funny on here because they do just like they did on Insomniac, which me and Kyle were talking about how weird it kind of felt. But having one of your singles be the album closer, Macy's Day Parade, which a great closer, one of my favorite Green Day album closers, absolutely. And I think such a great and really minor single is probably one of their least successful singles, I would say. You really don't hear that one played at all You know, I mean, they did a music video for it and everything, but that's another one you really don't see that get airplay either. But a really good song, but you know, it's always just odd to me that it's like the album closer is a single. You know, it's just so odd. But a great song, just kind of. But another one where it's like, and it's an acoustic song, but it's not like Good Riddance. You know what I mean? Like they did the acoustic thing again, but what I like is that they didn't like rehash in a way like, oh, people like that, so we did another one like it. It's like the only thing I think that song has in common with Good Riddance is that it's on acoustic guitar. I mean, also obviously the drums and bass come in, but it's still a pretty acoustic song, you know. But I think besides the acoustic guitar, not a whole lot of similarities to Good Riddance. And I mean, I like that because they could have tried doing that as well. You know, they could have went, because really at this point, the other thing people forget is like Warning didn't sell all that great, and had American Idiot not sold well, I mean, I don't know where the band would have been. I mean, I don't know if that would have been the end of them or what, but like commercially, they were not the band from, you know, 6 years prior. You know, they were not Dookie. Dookie was not the big thing anymore. They were not, you know, they were still kind of playing arenas, but like, you know, I don't know that they were filling them. And like, even when they were, you know, like with like the Pop Disaster tour, like, you know, they were playing with Blink-182, who at the time were, you know, doing a lot bigger, you know, commercially, you know, and were selling a lot more tickets than Green Day. But, you know, they could have, I think, at some point been like, oh, you know, like we got to just fucking do something, you know, to sell records. And it's like, yeah, maybe they could have shit out, you know, Good Riddance Part 2, you know, like just maybe the whole record didn't sound like that, but they know if they throw that acoustic ballad on there, like it will sell records. But it's like they really didn't do that on here. You know, they just it's again, it's them not doing the thing that could probably like, and it's funny to say because obviously they're a huge band, but it's like, you know, they do things that, you know, because even Good Riddance, as big as it is now, at the time probably wasn't the way to go. Like that probably wasn't the best idea. That's not the way you would go if you were Green Day and you were trying to sell records. You would try to write like When I Come Around Part 2. You know, obviously it worked for them when they went the acoustic ballad route, but like you don't expect that when you do it. You know, that just ended up happening. You know, it was kind of a happy accident. You know, it wasn't forced. And that's kind of what I like about them, is that a lot of their stuff isn't forced. It just comes out good, but they didn't do the move of, same with Insomniac. It's Dookie with kind of better production and stuff, but it's still not them just rewriting entirely. You know, it has a similar sound, but it's not just the same record again. You know, it's different enough. And actually, you know, if you listen to our podcast, you know, Kyle moved me on this, but I think it's even better than Dookie now. You know, but still, they could have went a different route on Insomniac and probably sold more records. You know, that it's just a fact with them that I respect. You know, obviously a huge band, but not doing the, like Blink-182. I love Blink-182, but I mean, look at, like, they kind of went the safe route in that way. And I'm not shitting on them that way. I love Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, but like they didn't go some insane, like when Enema of the State got big, they didn't have this reaction of, you know, we have to write On a Wire, or, you know, like the self-titled Suicide Machines record. They didn't go that way. It's like, instead they're like, no, like this makes sense. This is logical. This is the next logical step. You know, this would be the next logical move, you know, and if you go that route, I think it ends up working out more, you know what I mean? And really, I mean, Green Day is just as big as Blink-182, but Blink-182's probably still sold more records for that reason, you know, that they kind of, I think, went more of that route of like, this is a more logical step. You know, where Green Day, I think, kind of went more a lot of times, even with that stuff, I mean, doing the trilogy, you know what I mean? It's like, and a lot of people don't love it. I was listening to Uno recently. Uno's really good. This is my consensus. Uno's a pretty good record. And if you took Uno and then took a few songs off Dose and Trey, you would have a pretty solid record. Like one really solid record, but you don't need three. But again, like, you know, still, that's kind of a band where it's like, I don't know, I kind of respect that, because I'm like, I don't know that was the way to go commercially. That's probably not commercially the way to release 3 albums like that. Like, that may not have been the way to go, but that's what they wanted to do, you know? So, I mean, I can respect that about them, and I think that's what they did on Warning. And, you know, still pretty slept on, I would say. Still not one that gets mentioned a lot when people are talking about their favorite Green Day records, and definitely should be. And speaking of Blink-182, getting on here with Neighborhoods, a album very, very polarizing. I would still say, I don't think time has really changed anyone. I think it's been about a decade, and I feel like if you liked this album when it came out, you still do. If you didn't like it, you still don't like it. But my thing is, this is one of those ones where, well, like I was talking about earlier, after a while, your expectations of something are going to be so high they can never be met. And I think that's the thing with Neighborhoods. This album, if you just take the album for the songs and you just listen to them, I think they're good songs. I think it's a good album. Do I think that it's as good as what they did before they broke up? No, absolutely not. It's most. There's a few good songs on there that like After Midnight's one where I do think that's one of their strongest singles. That is one of my favorite. Like, we're talking singles, I think that's a great single. I think that's a great song. It's kind of like, to me, and I've heard other people say this, like, had they not broken up after Self-Titled, I think After Midnight is an example of a song we probably would have heard on the next album. You know, had there not been, what would that have been? I think 8 years in between. You know, I mean, and really, I mean, it's funny when you think about it. That's not, I mean, it is long for a time in between albums, but it's like there's so many bands who, if you look, they went decades in between albums. So, I mean, eight years isn't crazy, but it is enough, and they did progress. You know, obviously Mark and Travis plus 44, and then Tom over into Angels and Airwaves. You know, they were doing different things, obviously much more mature sounds than, you know, what they were doing like with Enema of the State and whatnot. But, you know, I think like After Midnight was kind of one where it's like that would probably be like a continuation, where the other stuff, like here's the thing with the record. It definitely sounds like if you took Angels and Airwaves and plus 44 and you put them together, you know, and it's funny because in a way you would say it was Blink-182, but it's not. It's kind of a different thing. I think you get songs like Ghost on the Dance Floor and, you know, even like even kind of like Up All Night. Like, I mean, I know that riff was written pre-breakup, but it's like even that song, like some of the like added effects and stuff on there. It's like it is Blink-182, but it's like it does have the mark of Angels and Airwaves in it. You know, which is obviously going to happen. You know, that was, and same with plus 44. Obviously, there's songs, you know, including some Mark songs where you're like, oh yeah, that totally could have been a plus 44 song. You know, and who knows, maybe it almost was. You know. But not a bad record, I don't think. I think it also leaves a bad taste in people's mouths that it was they all recorded separately. You know, I think that really left a bad taste in people's mouths. And I think it would have been, I mean, Dogs Eating Dogs they did together in a studio, and that was really good. I mean, that's another, I love that EP. It's a great EP. And, you know, I think that was also a testament where, yeah, look at, they do, I think most people do. If you're going to work better if you're working in the same room together. Like, I just think that's the case. But I don't, like, once again, like, Neighborhoods probably would have been better if they did that, but I don't think it's a bad record. That's kind of my stress with the Slept On records. My thing with these are records that don't get enough credit, and they deserve more credit. You know, like, they're not shit records. They're just, you know, and it doesn't even mean they're their greatest records. Like I'm saying, this isn't on par with Dude Ranch. This isn't even on par with Self-Titled. But this isn't a bad record. Like, these songs aren't really bad. There's a few songs that I would say maybe I would cut out, but even then, you would still have a full-length record. Like, even if you shaved off like 2 or 3 songs, you would still have a full-length record's worth of you know, good songs. And yeah, you know, like I think there's just certain things like they didn't record together, and people's expectations too. I mean, because I mean, look at the Self-Titled record was not left field, but it was just very mature for them. Ended up being successful. Like, it ended up being a lot of people's favorite record of theirs. And I think there was just so much fanfare. People were like, you know, just riding on it. So many people's favorite bands. You know, definitely still one of my favorite bands to this day. And I just think that after a while, no matter what you were going to put out, it's not gonna fulfill that. It's either, and the other thing is that you could either come out with something that sounds too much like, oh, they're just trying to rewrite this song, or then it's like, oh, this doesn't sound like them at all. And, you know, I think this album meets somewhere in between. I think it definitely has the Angels and Airwaves and plus 44 marks on it. You can hear those bands on it. But I mean, at its core, I still think it is a Blink-182 record. I mean, there's songs on there like After Midnight, and Heart's All Gone is another one where it's like, I think that is a great song. You know, that's one of their fastest songs. And I think that one has like a plus 44 kind of vibe to it as well. But, you know, like there's songs on there where I go, I think they fit perfectly in the catalog, you know. And the members are all kind of different. I think Mark might be the only one who still says positive things about it. Even a few years after releasing it, I think Tom and Travis both kind of said, like, it's not like our best. Like we probably should have been working together and stuff. I think it was Mark who was kind of defending it more. It's like there's some good songs on there. But I know even now, actually, they don't really play many songs. I think they play like Up All Night Live, but I don't even know that they've ever played anything else with Matt Skiba in the band. I don't know that he's ever played on any other Neighborhood songs, which is too bad because, once again, I think After Midnight, an amazing, like, I think that's such a great single of theirs. I think that's one that, because it's also not played to death. You know, they're like, I got to admit, there's certain songs, like I Miss You and All the Small Things stuff, where it's like, you just heard them too many times. Like I skip them. Like I just do. If I'm listening to them in the state, almost every time I skip all the small things. And same with Self-Titled. I'll listen to the whole thing, but when I hit I Miss You, I'll normally turn it off just because I've heard them so much. They're not bad songs. I'm not shitting on them. I've just heard them too many times. I'm like, I don't need to hear this. Like I'll skip this one this time. Another one with this record, I mean, I don't know that it would make it any less slept on, but I don't think it got as much like promotion. I have heard them talk about this where like, I believe they were on Interscope for this one, and like the rock department at that point was basically like it almost was non-existent. And it was the same with Jimmy Eat World. I mean, they put out Invented, and they're on the same label, and they put that out like a year before Neighborhoods. And kind of same thing where it's like there really wasn't like, there was no real A&R team behind it. There's no real like marketing or promotion. And this one kind of hit it too. But it's also like, I look at that and I go like, I think Blink-182 are big enough where it's like they may have just been able to even self-release that. I was almost like, you know, like, and they did with Dogs Eating Dogs, and it made sense. It's like, you guys are so big. It's like you already have so many eyes, and there's so much like already on you that's like, I don't know how much a major label can do for you in, you know, in the 2010s. Like, I don't know what that really would have did for them. You know, I don't know that it really did much. I mean, because they were on it, and you know, I don't think it did anything major. And you hear those songs on the radio too. Like, they got some airplay, but you know, that's another one where it's like, you know, at this point, you don't really, you know what I mean? Like, if they're playing Blink-182, they're playing like current singles. They're playing stuff off like Enema and Take Off Your Pants and Self-Titled. Like, you really don't hear Up All Night or After Midnight, you know, really being played much anymore. And, you know, not a bad record. Once again, not their greatest, but not bad. I think it gets slept on by a lot of people where if you just realize that it's not going to be, you know, it's them a little more grown up, and it's in a lot of ways, it's not the same band who wrote, you know, your favorite record when they were, you know, in their 20s, you know, that they're now like dudes who, you know, during Neighborhoods were all like late 30s, maybe early 40s even. I think they were all like late 30s at that point, but all late 30s, had been married and had kids and shit. Like, not the same, you know what I mean? Like, they just changed. And Mark and Tom weren't like, you know, they weren't like hanging out every day and weren't like the same best friends they once were. You know, it's just a different dynamic. And if you go in kind of realizing that, it's not a bad record, you know. And again, few songs that I would actually say, you know, I went back and listened to it, you know, before I did this podcast, and there were a few songs that like back when it came out, like I was like, oh, they're not bad. And it's like, now I'm like, yeah, like I get it. Like a few of those, I'm like, yeah, we could probably do without them. But yeah, overall, good record. I think worth spinning from time to time. You know, definitely worth putting on here and there. And moving on, another one here, the Ataris, Welcome the Night. I mean, talk about a slept-on record. One of the ones that really, like, when I was even thinking of this episode, this was probably the first one that came to mind. This album, I mean, and I remember seeing the music video for Not Capable of Love for the first time. Like, I was scrolling through iTunes way back in the day, like 2007 when this album came out, and I saw the video on there, and I didn't even know they were putting out a new record, which is also kind of goes into part of why this is, you know, just never got the attention, you know, not very, very well promoted, but like I saw it was on there. I saw there's a music video, and I'm like, and the album had already been out, I think, for a couple months, but I'm like, oh, they have a new album. Now at that point, I'd never even owned an Ataris record, but obviously I knew Boys of Summer and In This Diary, like, you know, So Long a Story was pretty big, and I knew those songs. So I mean, I liked them enough. But I remember like putting it on, I'm like, I had to check. I'm like, is that the same lead singer? Like, Chris Rowe looks so different. The song sounded so different. Like, there was really a second where I was almost like, is this the same band? Like, it was just so, it just caught you off guard. And then you like look at that, even like the album art's very different. You know, I mean, the name Welcome the Night, like everything about it is just so different. And it wasn't in a bad way, though. I went out and ended up being the first. Welcome Night was the first Ataris record that I ever bought, actually. I mean, not the first one I heard, but the first one that I went out and actually bought. And I went and got it. And I mean, I got to say, like, Not Capable of Love, I like that enough, but like the rest of it, I don't think I really got at the time. It wasn't, and it didn't turn me off of the band. Like I still liked the singles and whatnot, but just kind of was like, yeah, whatever. I didn't really listen to that album all that much. From time to time they would come on in shuffle, and I would listen to it, but not really something that I would go on my way to listen to. And like a lot of other people, it took me years, but then I would go back and probably I'd say like 2011, 2012, I think I started listening to it again. I remember getting on vinyl really cheap, which it's a very rare record, but I found it in a clearance bin at a record theater. Shout out to them, and rest in peace in Buffalo. And it was like, I think $8 maybe on vinyl, and like double LP too, I think. If I remember correctly, I still have it, and I love it. It's signed by Chris Rowe. It's I forget what he wrote. Oh, he wrote New Year's Day because he played it for me. I asked him to play New Year's Day on Twitter, and he played it for me at the show that night and dedicated it to me. So then afterwards, when I brought it out, I'm like you played the song on Welcome the Night. Now you got to sign my record, and he wrote New Year's Day on it, and I think he wrote a nice little sweet note underneath. Very very good guy, but. That was a good show. He was opening for MXPX and Five Iron Frenzy. That was a great show. He just played acoustic, but it was great to hear New Year's Day acoustic. That was really really cool. But anyway, I kind of picked it up just because it was cheap, and the nice thing about vinyl is it makes you kind of sit there and listen to a record front to back. And I listened to it again. I'm like, this is not a bad record. Like, this is a really good record. And you start realizing too, because here's the other thing. 2011, 2012, like this is maybe 5 years after it was released. That's a sound that a lot of bands at that time were kind of doing. And even in there are a lot of bands who kind of got, categorized as pop punk, who kind of were doing what the Ataris are doing 5 years earlier on Welcome the Night. I mean, really an album ahead of its time. Like, I think a lot of people will tell you that too. Like, it's a sound that at the time didn't sell very well. It hurt the Ataris' career really, really bad. I mean, it really, and I don't know that he would want to talk about it, but if I ever I would love to interview Chris Rowe, and I would like to talk about the impact of Welcome to Night. And I know he's a big fan of it still, big proponent of the album, still very, very proud of it. But I think he would have to tell you as well. It did him no favors for his career at all. I mean, this album tanked the Ataris and really, really hurt them, really badly. And but a few years later, I was a little older, I listened and I realized that. I'm like, it doesn't sound like the Ataris at all. It doesn't sound like an Ataris record, including coming off So Long Astoria. Having that more pop punk, polished pop punk sound, to then being see, people forget that too. Their lineup was fucking huge. They had a 6-piece lineup during the Welcome the Night era. Live, they had this huge lineup. And if you don't know too, the only people from So Long Astoria going on to Welcome the Night was Chris Rowe and then John, their guitar player. He stuck around and he played on that record. But besides that, they had a brand new rhythm section. Their drummer and bass player both left, and then they added Angus Cook, I believe his name is, on cello, I think, which he played cello on some of the early Atari releases and some different stuff. He also produced those records. So he always kind of did stuff with them. And I think to this day still does stuff with them. But he was an official member of the band during that era. And they added a couple different people. And yeah, I mean, just totally different from a band. They kind of went a different way too, where So Long Astoria being more produced and polished. And then on the next record, really fuzzy indie rock, kind of shoegazy, totally different from Boys of Summer or In This Diary. Totally different from that side, but also not super surprising. The difference between them and I think with the Get Up Kids, with On a Wire, there's a lot of influences on that record that I don't think you hear on earlier releases. With the Ataris, go back and listen to Blue Skies. Yes, that's a pop punk record, but there's like elements in there where you can hear the experimental side, kind of that indie rock. You know what I mean? Like those bands that Chris Rowe loved, because Chris Rowe like loved the Replacements and, you know, My Bloody Valentine and the Velvet Underground and like Husker Du and Tom Waits and like, you know, and he also loved like the Descendants and Arches of Loaf and Superchunk and stuff. But like, you know, he's a guy who's listening to that. He's not like listening to like Blink-182 and, you know, like Good Charlotte or like, you know, like bands that he was touring with at the time. Like he was listening to totally different shit. And you can hear those influences even on their pop punk releases. But, you know, so it's like there are foreshadows of Welcome the Night, I think. Even on So Long Astoria, not so much that you would think that, don't get me wrong, not so much that you would go, oh, the next album's going to sound like this. But I mean, there are elements throughout those albums where it's like, oh yeah, you can see where like Chris is kind of playing with these influences, but you know, he goes all in with them on Welcome the Night, which I think is amazing. But another one where this is a record that should have been 100% should have been released under a different name. It did it no favors being released under the Ataris. And I mean, if you go back, I mean, if you look at the time around this, the label didn't want it to be called, or no, actually, Chris Rowe, I believe, didn't want it to be called an Ataris record. He wanted it to be called something else. But the label wanted it to be under the Ataris name, obviously, because the Ataris, you know, just sold, you know, who knows how many records with Astoria, you know, coming off that, selling all these records, they're like, you know, no, like you can't release a record under a different name, you know, which totally, I mean, you do think about it, and it's like, okay, that'd be like if Green Day was coming off of their biggest record, like Dookie, and then for Insomniac they went under a different name, you know, probably not the best idea for your career, probably not smart, but at the same time, in retrospect, I think it would have like I get it from the label's point of view where it's like, look at like you guys are successful, name recognition has a lot to do with it. Like we need you to release it under this name. That's what people know. Like people know the Ataris. Like I get where they're coming from, but now looking back at it, it's such a great album that I think was hurt because it was under a name where once again the preconceived notions of it's going to sound like this. Same like Hawthorne Heights with Fragile Future, where it's like it's going to sound like this, where no, it actually sounds like this instead. You know, it's something different. And I think being under a different name with the Ataris, I think would have ended up doing it really big favors. But at the time, I see why they wouldn't have thought that. I totally get why it was released under the Ataris. And then what ended up happening, though, is it wasn't released by the label anyway. Chris Rowe ended up having to, I believe, and I think he paid for like the recording and then releasing it and everything. And I think basically bankrupt him, you know, like really financially hurt him. Also because, you know, the return wasn't there. It wasn't a big record. It did not sell well at all. And, you know, I don't know how fast or if ever, you know, that he recouped the money that it took. It's also a really good sounding record. And, you know, there's a lot more production and layers to that record than any of the other Ataris albums. It was probably not all that cheap to, you know, get done and record. Because that's the other thing. That was also on that cusp of, you know, you really couldn't do this stuff, you know, home recording yet. You know I interview a lot of people on here where like, they're like, yeah, you know, like I released, you know, this record sounds amazing and I recorded it in my bedroom. You know, this was kind of right before that. You know, you think they were recording in like 2006, 2007. That's a time where that stuff's still kind of new and it's like, yeah, you can do it from home, but it's not, you know, it still sounds like you're recording at home. You know, it's not there yet where it is now where it's like you can record shit in your basement. It doesn't sound like you record in your basement, you know? So he's paying, you know, it's a lot of money probably coming out of pocket. Like all the money that he saw from the success of Astoria basically went into that, you know, and just sadly did not work out for him, you know? And I mean, even, but I will say, like, I think they did do things like, once again, with the reaction, it's like they played, I think I don't think they were playing Boys of Summer for a while. They weren't playing a lot of the old shit. They were basically just playing like stuff off Welcome the Night live, and they were like a 6-piece band. It was like, I mean, it was something, it's crazy because like, yes, I bought this album like, you know, the year it came out, not right when it came out, but a few months or so later. But like, you know, I didn't go see him live or anything like that. But if you go back and you like, and there are a lot of things I didn't know because at the time I didn't like follow like Absolute Punk and Punk News and stuff. I didn't find those till years later. But if you go back and like read the stuff going on at that time, even like interviews with Chris Rowe, like, you know, I think he was very much trying to get away from the whole Boys of Summer thing and that side of the band. And, and also another one where, I think around that time he was probably turning about 30, I mean, the Ataris were a band at that point for over a decade, so I mean, he'd been doing it for a while. I think he kind of wanted to kind of play more into some of his other influences and do different things. But, yes, you want it as an artist. I totally get it. And also I kind of respect that where, yeah, he didn't go the route of I'm just going to keep, I found the key to success. I'm just going to keep shitting out these songs, these like pop punk songs. And it's like, and I'm just going to keep selling all these albums. It's like, instead he's like, well, no, I want to do this instead. And it was very ambitious, but it's like, I do get it where it's like, I think at the time really kind of fucking yourselves over, releasing it under that name, then having to put all that money in, and it just not being the same, just not having the success, them not playing Boys of Summer when they were, playing live, playing mostly new stuff, having like strings and stuff live, like just really a different thing from what they were, even like 3 years prior to that, So I do, this is another album where it's like, look if you only like pop punk, and you're not a fan, if you're just so like into just like the early Ataris, not even So Long Astoria, like you only like the first couple records and stuff. Yeah, I could see where this isn't your your cup of tea. But like for one, even if you're not an Ataris fan, this is probably, if you're an indie rock fan, like shoegaze or like, I mean, even like Interpol or like Dinosaur Jr. or like, I mean, just, there's just so many different influences on there where it's like, there's like fuzzy indie rock at times. There's songs on there that are a little kind of power poppy, like, the Cheyenne line, I think one of Chris's best songs, New Year's Day. I mean, what a great song, Not Capable of Love. Just so many different great songs on that record. And, I think there's people who aren't Ataris fans who would like it. And then there are Ataris fans. So I think if you went back and listened to it, like it's now on there on the Ataris Bandcamp page, and Chris Rowe kind of wrote like a little thing under it, and I think like the very first thing on it is like, you're older now, your tastes have changed, go listen to this album again, because he knows, and it's like that's what he said. It's like that's the first thing. And if you go look on their Bandcamp, like forget what you think. Like, yes, I realize that when this came out, you weren't a fan of it, but you're now 10 years older. More than 10 years at this point, like 13 years older, you listen to different music, you probably have different tastes, you would probably like it. And I think he's absolutely right, I think so. I think a lot of people have come around to it where, there are still people, like, I've seen the Ataris live quite a few times. There are people who only really know, like, So Long Astoria. Like, that record was so big. They still get a lot of people, not everyone in the crowd, but there's a mix of, like, people who are there for just So Long Astoria. There's some people who are there for, like, just like Blue Skies and End Is Forever era. And then they're like me, like I love all eras, so I'm there for, there's definitely a lot of people like me out there who are, fans of every era and just, want to hear shit from all of it. And I think there are it's not the entire crowd, but they will play songs occasionally from Welcome the Night. And there's people who still never heard that album, so it's like, they kind of don't have the same reaction. But the people who know that record seem to really, it's one of those songs where the whole crowd doesn't go nuts, but there's a handful of that crowd that fucking love it, that like they go, like they make up for the rest of the people not being as into it. Them being into it makes up for that, if you get what I'm saying, like the excitement of it and whatnot. The other reason, I mean, for one, I think they also realize that people want to hear, because that was the other thing. After they kind of went the other way, like after it went that way, I think Chris kind of turned around and started kind of going more for a while, like, all right, well now I'm only playing things from like Blue Skies and End Is Forever and stuff. Like he did kind of go that way then after, where for I think years didn't really play any Welcome the Night stuff, only played kind of like the hits and the fan favorites. And, now it's kind of a nice in-between where, like, yeah, they're not going to play tons and tons of songs off of it, but you will hear one or two from time to time. Like, I probably wouldn't even say you'll hear 3 in one set, but you might hear 2 songs off of it, which I'm more than happy to hear. The other thing, though, I know they don't play them live, too, is there are really weird tunings. I know, like, Not Capable of Love, I asked him to play that live before, and he's just like, it's the weirdest tuning. It's like, it's this, I think he even called it his My Bloody Valentine tuning. It's hilarious, because I remember asking him on Twitter years ago to play it live, and he gave me, because Twitter, what do you have, like 140 characters? He gave me like a 3-tweet explanation. Like, he needed 3 tweets to explain it all, which I thought was the nicest thing. Like, he could have just been like, fuck off, kid, I'm not playing that song. Or he could have just not answered me. But instead, he gave me like this 3 like tweet response on why he couldn't play it. And it was because, I mean, for one, they don't really play it live, so you know it all that well. But like, also, it's this really weird tuning. It just would not work. And they went into like how he always wanted to write a song in this weird My Bloody Valentine tuning, how it was influenced by that, and just really explaining it all from me just being like, hey, would you play? And I think I did add that, though. I'm like, I know it's in a weird as fuck tuning, but would you play it? And I think he liked that, and he did. He gave me this big ol' explanation. And so I can tell you that if you've ever wondered why you don't hear that live, it's not that he doesn't like that song. It's just the tuning. The tuning for it's really, really odd. And also, I think there's a lot of guitar effects on it that are only on that song that, they may not have for their, like live rigs. So it's like, and who knows, maybe it wouldn't sound as good. But, there are reasons they don't play that one live, but not because, Chris doesn't like it. I definitely think he's still a fan of that album. The really cool thing I'll say, too, for them live is kind of them finding that happy medium is, he's kind of went back and like, it's been like 5 years now, but I remember them doing the Blue Skies tour where they played that record front to back, or not even front to back, actually. They played it in, I don't even know what the choice for order was, but they just played it in a different order than in sequence. But what I really liked is that they would like jam on the bridges of songs. They would kind of do these like extended intros and stuff where it's like they still were the same songs, but they would add this really cool thing that kind of sounded like what they were doing on Welcome the Night, like that kind of more mature side. Like, they're these old like pop punk songs, they're obviously written by like teenagers and like dudes in their early 20s, but had this more mature kind of vibe, like, and really good musicianship. Like, I mean, just these amazing just jams and stuff, like on the Bridge of Your Boyfriend Sucks, like, is a good example of that. And I know they've done that not just on that tour. Like, there's a lot of great videos if you go see them play that throughout the years where like they do this great just jam on the bridge of it, and it's like this just, it's amazing. And it's like watching it live, like the energy of it, the build up, and it's like, it's just so much more of just a band just doing straight up pop punk songs. And it's really cool because they don't change them so much that if you're a fan, you're not sitting there. They're not one of those bands where like you go listen to or you go see them live and you can't tell what song it is until halfway through and you go, oh, I know this song. They're just playing some fucking weird version of it that no one knows that they're playing like their hit single because they're doing some weird thing about it. Like, they don't do it like that. Like, you can tell the songs, you can sing along, but they'll add these things to it. They'll give it this new breath of fresh air where I think Chris as an artist, it keeps it fresh for him. He's not just playing, San Dimas, high school football rules for the 5,000th time. Like, he's doing something where it makes him excited too. Like, he's still having fun too. And it's cool to see them kind of find that happy medium, after watching, after releasing Welcome the Night, kind of writing off, their history, and quite frankly, what made them big in the first place, and then going the other way and going, okay, well, that bit us in the ass, so now we're only playing the hits. Now kind of being, I think, in a better place where it's like, yes, we realize a lot of people here want to hear these songs, we'll play them, but it's like, we'll also play some of the shit that we want to play, and that, we know that hardcore fans and people who have stuck around and, listen to all the albums want to hear as well. So, I really do enjoy that as a fan. But Welcome the Night, such a slept-on record. And another one where, look at, even if you're not a fan of the Ataris, if you're a fan of that, like, just, I mean, indie rock I know is kind of general, but it's like just fuzzy indie rock, kind of, not straight up shoegazy, but, definitely some shoegaze influence. Like, you got to listen to this record. It's so good and really, truly ahead of its time. I think had this record been released in 2012 and under a different band name, I think it would have been really, really big. I think this album could have been really fucking huge. I mean, truly, just way too bad that it slept on, but a great record nonetheless. And while there are tons and tons of more records I could talk about, I know we've been doing this for about 90 minutes now, so I'll keep it here to one more. But I also want to say, though, too, I would love to hear from you guys. Anyone listening to this right now, hit me up, powerchordhour@gmail.com. I want to know what records you think are slept on. This is just the tip of the iceberg, because I was even writing my list, and I had to start cutting things out because I'm like, I'm going to start talking about these albums, And I'm just going to get to a point where it's like, all right, on hour 7, I might have to shut the fuck up. So, I'm keeping this to like, a handful of albums, but I would love to hear, albums that you guys are thinking of when you think of Slept On Records. But Big Star, In Space is the last one I'm going to talk about here. And this is another one. A lot of albums that I've said this about almost every album on this episode. Far from my favorite record from the band, but still a great record. Now, Big Star, I mean, they only have 4 albums, so I mean, they don't have such a catalog to go through. But I mean, this would be my least favorite of the 4, but still a good record. Now, the biggest thing I got to say about this record is, it's a different record from the first 3. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like Big Star in their initial run back in the 70s, I really feel like you have your number 1 record, Radio City, and Third, and then it's like, In Space is really a nice, like, it's not a quintessential record, it's not their best work, but it's a good record. I mean, and for one, it is a damn fine power pop record, for one. I mean, it is, if you just listen to it as a power pop record and don't try to, if you're going in expecting something like because they were just, what they did for power pop, even, which is, funny enough, commercially, they were not successful at all in their, back in their day, but since then have become such a huge influence on just so many people, just such a huge influence on music in general. And, if you don't go in going, okay, it's like the same album like that, because it's not, and it's not supposed to be. It's a record that they did. I mean, Third came out, in like 1977, I think it finally came out. I know they recorded in 74, and it came out in like 77. So we're talking like 27 years in between albums. Like, I mean, a long, long time. Like, I mean, the longest of any of these albums that I've talked about on this episode, like, about 27 years in between. And, they had been touring at this point for like a decade with the new lineup with, obviously Alex and Jody, but adding John and Ken from the Posies, who, which I thought was a great addition, because that's what I want to get to on this album. The thing about this album is, in a lot of ways, it's partly a Posies record as well. I mean, Alex doesn't sing lead on all the songs. Ken and John helped write songs on this record. They sang on the record too. They're half the band. So it's like, of course it's going to have a Posies influence. And obviously the Posies are hugely influenced by Big Star. So it's like, I mean, I think for one, I don't think you could have gotten 2 better members for, that later era Big Star. Once they came back in 93, started doing the reunion shows sporadically and then doing, eventually doing In Space, I think they were the best guys for the job, because really they and still are a modern day kind of Alex Chilton, Chris Bell duo. Like, there's not, like, John Davis is like the other dude just writing like modern day power pop, like the best power pop, like of present day that isn't like Big Star. It's basically, yeah, like John Davis and then John R. Ken Stringfellow. Like those are your guys. Like those are the masters of it, and including John and Ken of just being like, you want to talk about just knowing how to write like the perfect just like hook and chorus and just a catchy song, like just so good at it. And I think In Space, like, you get to hear these dudes who, at the time, maybe not super new, because the Posies had been around since like late 80s, In Space came out in 2005, but still the young guys, in the new school power pop. And it's the old school and the new school playing together. And also just knowing how much John and Ken loved Big Star and being able to play on that, I think they cared. And I think the songs are really good. It's just, once again, if you're going in that being like, I want number 1 record, well, guess what? I mean, for one, Chris Bell's no longer singing on it. And number 2, I mean, you have half a different band. And those guys aren't, those guys aren't them. Like you hear a song with like John singing on it, and you may think of like because once again, that's why it sounds like the Posies, because you're used to hearing John singing Posey songs. So when you hear them there, including because it sounds like the Posies, because it's power pop, I think it's in a way where it's like, no matter what they were going to do, it's not going to be, the same. It's not going to have the same impact as those first 3 Big Star records. But I don't think it was supposed to. I mean, once again, Alex isn't singing lead on every song. there's quite a few covers on this album as well. It's kind of I'm happy they put it out, and I think there's good songs on it, but I would be very surprised if they went in trying to make a record that was supposed to be on par with the first three. I don't think that was ever the plan, to be honest. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think Alex Chilton was ever trying to do that. That just wasn't Alex Chilton. Like, if you talk to anyone who knows Chilton or who knew Alex Chilton, I don't think in 2005 he was trying to write the next best big star record. And not in a way where I think he was writing shit. I just don't. He was writing what he wanted to write. You know what I mean? Same with that. Like, that's why he did covers. That's why he did that's what Alex Chilton did his entire career. Talk about another guy who was reactionary to his success. His very reactionary to the success he had early on. And I get it. I also get it. But, also the legacy of Big Star he had a reaction to, and you hear both things. I think he had admiration for it to a point, but I also think there were times where he was very much over it when maybe the fans weren't. Like he was over Big Star when the rest of the world wasn't. But I get it. He was also. I remember talking to David Julian Leonard, who was a friend of his, and kind of that thing where he said, like, the mainstream kind of hardened him. He was kind of screwed around by the music industry, and he had success very early on, and he kept pouring his heart into things and not getting the results that he wanted. And I think that's what kind of made him the guy who was a little jaded at times, and was kind of a smart ass and a wise ass about things, and was kind of reserved and kind of shut down when talking about certain things. That's just kind of the result of, sadly, his career. A very underrated guy, which once again, commercially, but that's the interesting thing. He had a hit with the Box Tops with The Letter when he was like, I think he was like 14. Like, he had a gold record at age 14 and never did again. Like, that was his biggest thing. And he didn't even write the song. And this guy wrote some of the greatest songs you've ever heard. Like that man wrote 13. Like, you hear that song and it's like, God damn, like, that's one of the best songs you ever hear. But that got like never even an inkling of the kind of success that The Letter did, And the Box Tops are great. It's like, hey, like, they're in their own thing and they're great for what they did. But it is too bad, and I think that's what hurt him, is like, he had the success so young that then he tried doing his own thing, and it was him, it was his songs, it was his personality, and it didn't do as well, it didn't sell like he wanted it to. And it was made for like, that's the other thing, it's like not made for mainstream in the way that, it's like conceited or like, this really like, oh, we're writing this way because we know it's popular. But what I'm saying is, it's power pop, like number one record should have been a fucking number one record. Like, it was good and it should have been accepted by the mainstream. Like, that could have been played on the radio. You know what I mean? Like, in that sense, not that it was written to be played on radio. Those are well-written songs, but it's like those songs deserve to get that attention, just like that, Alex had with the Box Tops. But anyways, I think that goes back to with In Space, where like, yeah, they put out another record, but it's like he's not one of those guys where I think he really was like, oh my God, I have to like live up to this. I think he cared less than other people. Not that he didn't care about the album, but it's like, yeah, we're going to do covers. I'm not going to sing on every song. It's going to be something different, and it makes for one of those things where I think there's Big Star fans who like the album, but I think overall a lot of people just don't think about it much, like I think that's my thing overall, is it's not even that it's super hated. I just think a lot of people forget about it. I think it's very much a forgotten album, and it shouldn't be, because it's a good power pop record. Like, if you just want to listen to good power pop, this is the album. Like, it's just like you get members of the Posies and members of the original Big Star, and they wrote an album together, and like, this is like the outcome I thought was really, really good. It's not Radio City, it's not number one record, but it's a damn good record. I think it does stand on its own. And I think if you remember that and you just kind of go, hey, this is like 27 years after the fact of Third, it's pretty damn good. It's like, quit comparing it 27 years later to like, this is like the next album 2-3 years later. It's like, no, this is just kind of a fun thing that they put out after touring for so long. They didn't even tour off the album. They kind of put it out and then didn't even tour off of it, and as far as afterwards when they played live shows, I don't know how often they played songs off of it, which I would have loved to have caught them live. But yeah, just In Space, not a bad record. 15 years later now, I think it does get some love. I know it was like pressed on vinyl again this year. And people, I think people have come around to it. I've seen people kind of be like, I wasn't a big fan when it came out, and now I kind of like it more. And I think people do. It's not even like, I don't even say it would be your introduction. Like, if you've never listened to Big Star, I wouldn't like direct you to that album in particular. But it's like, once you've listened to those three albums, the first three albums, like, go listen to In Space. It's a good album. People just kind of don't talk about it and kind of forget about it. But I think that also talks about too how good the first, just that first original run of Big Star was. That it's like, those albums were just so important to people. And they mean that much to people, that it's like they just eclipse those ones. Sometimes people write albums that are just so good that they eclipse a lot of the other shit they do, and I think that's an example of that. But that is the episode. Those are slept on records. I mean, we're almost to hour 2 here. So like I said, I have so many more records I could talk about. I was going to talk about Transit's Young New England for one, AFI's Crash Love. I was going to kind of get into the Replacements, All Shook Down, and Don't Tell a Soul, but it's one of those ones where I've talked about that so much that, that was one where I'm like, all right, we won't spend too much time on that. But I mean, so many more albums that I just think are slept on that aren't bad records, but don't get the credit they deserve. 100% don't get the credit that they deserve. They weren't bad records. They were just different from what people were expecting, and that's what make them slept on. But yeah, I would love to hear from you. Hit me up, powerchordhour@gmail.com. I want to know what albums you think are slept on. I want to know if you agree with the ones I talked about tonight. Maybe you don't. Maybe you go, nah, man, you're wrong. That's a shitty record. Let me know, powerchordhour@gmail.com. But yeah, thank you so much for checking this one out. I enjoyed doing it. Don't forget to follow the show at Power Chord Hour on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. And we're on your radio dial, the Power Chord Hour radio show, every Friday night from 10 Eastern to midnight on 107.9 WRFA in Jamestown, New York. And you can listen to that from anywhere. Stream us on the WRFA mobile app at WRFALP.com/streaming. You can stream the whole station there. And go check out all the other great shows, too. There are other shows much, much better than mine. But I love that station and would love if you checked out the radio show. I play tons of music on there. Not totally different from the podcast. I basically play all the music that I talk about on here. I talk about the Replacements on here. I play the Replacements on there. That kind of deal. But check it out. I would love if you did. That's where it all started. We've been doing the radio show since 2016 here, and I love doing it. But that is going to be the episode for this week. Thank you so much for checking it out. We will be back next week, maybe with a guest, maybe not. I'm not sure yet. I don't know. We'll tune back in and you'll find out. But until then, for the Power Chord Hour, I'm Anthony Merchant. Thanks for listening.